Hey, all. Welcome to the next episode of Conversations. Conversations is my podcast where I talk with my favorite people about things I'm personally interested in. With Conversations, I'll talk to people the way I would actually talk to them, so there won't be background context or standard questions that you'd probably hear on other podcasts. You can find that elsewhere for pretty much everybody I'll talk to. So far, this has been an awesome space for me to have meaningful conversations with great people, and I've gotten a lot out of it. I hope you will too. My next guest is Matt Mochary. Matt has been my professional coach for the past year and a half. I've been really fortunate to work with him, as he's also coached many of the great tech CEOs, including Naval and Brian Armstrong. Matt has a great podcast with Tim Ferriss, where he goes through his coaching method with Tim Live, if you'd like to learn more. I went into coaching with Matt pretty reluctantly. It was something Fred Ursum, one of the co-founders of Coinbase and my longtime advisor, recommended once DYDX got to a head count of 20. The first meeting I had with Matt was not at all what I expected. I came in with all of these business questions. How do we find product market fit? How do I hire executives? And though we did discuss some of those tactical things, the thing Matt preached right out of the gates was don't be motivated by fear. My initial response was something like, okay, I guess that's ideal, but how the hell is that going to solve these real business problems for me? This doesn't seem like the most important thing right now. Fast forward a year and a half, and I really could not have been more wrong. Striving to not be motivated by fear is the single biggest thing that's helped me in DYDX and my entire life since then. I'll talk a lot more about this with Matt in just a minute, but it's hard to overstate how big of a change this has been for me. It's allowed me to make better decisions, be a better leader, while also becoming a lot happier along the way. And I can honestly say I feel little to no stress running DYDX now, and I credit all of that to Matt. So let's talk to the man himself, Matt Mochary. Cool. So like we were talking about before, the first thing I really wanted to dive into more is kind of this mentality around not being driven by fear. And this is something, like we've talked about a lot, that both of us have really strongly come to believe. I'll say for my own piece, Matt, as you know, I met you about a year and a half ago at this point, and I was pretty surprised, I will say, with what coaching ended up being. And fast forward to today, it's been extremely impactful on my life, and I've completely come to believe that not being motivated by fear is the most important thing, at least in my life, and I think it can be the most important thing in a lot of people's lives. But one of the things that I haven't really been able to figure out yet is why it's so important. Like, why do so many things come back to this, to not being motivated by fear? And how would you kind of explain that to me or somebody else? Like, why is this so important? Like, clearly this is something like pretty much anybody would probably say that, like, yeah, if all else being equal, I would rather not be motivated by fear. Clearly that's a good thing, but why is it the most important thing?
To me, it comes down to brain function, the brain functioning well or not functioning well. And so when our brain activity is in our prefrontal cortex, that is when our brain is functioning well. And so like at this point, you and I have coaching calls, say, hey, Matt, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Here's a situation. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. And I just kind of nod my head and go, yeah, makes sense. Because you're now operating in your prefrontal cortex most of the time. But not everybody, because you now recognize when your amygdala gets triggered and you're able to not act when you're there until you're able to get out of it. But most people don't know that, because when the amygdala fires, it's like a goldfish being in a vase of water or a tank. The goldfish doesn't know that it's in water. And so most people, when their amygdala triggers, it's instantaneous. And so just the thoughts then, there's no difference between thoughts that happen before, thoughts that happen after. They're just pure as thoughts. Whereas to an external person, it's like, oh my gosh, something just happened to that human and their thoughts are now completely different. But the human doesn't recognize it. And so that's why it's so important, because the brain is now no longer operating well. Mm-hmm. And then there's two parts of why an amygdala gets triggered. One is the feeling of anger, and the other is the feeling of fear. And anger also is much more obvious. People around recognize, like, holy shit, this person is being a complete asshole. Like, whoa. And it's very clear, and often then the human gets feedback. Like, whoa, you're being super aggressive. You're yelling, you're whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But fear is is not obvious, because fear is the absence of. We simply go, I'm not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do anything. People aren't even going to know, because I'm not going to elect. Again, there's no outward action. And that's why fear is the more insidious, because it prevents me from not only doing what is likely necessary to be done, but even giving an indication to anyone around me that I'm even thinking about this.
Yeah.
That's why I think fear is the big one. It causes the brain to not behave optimally, and it's more often than not hidden to myself and others.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that's what I was going to add is even to oneself, it's really hard to tell if you're in fear. And I think fear can be really deep-seated too. Like for me, I would always just go around a year ago being like, I'm just a shy person. Like that's the way it is. I'm introverted. I don't really like talking to people I don't know. Like, yeah, that's like reasonable. There's a lot of shy people out there, right? And I would still say I'm kind of towards the introverted on the spectrum. And this is just an example of kind of a way I realized in a deep-seated way I was kind of motivated by fear. But now, fast forward to today, when I really feel like maybe I'm not 100% not motivated by fear, but I think I do a good job of it. I realized I actually do like talking to a lot of people. And it was really kind of a fear that was holding me back of like, oh, what if I open up and they don't like what I say, or like all these other things. And I think social awkwardness, I just bring that up because I feel like that's something pretty much everybody can relate to. But it just can be really deep-seated. And a lot of times you feel like you don't even know. So just recognizing that, I think, can be one of the most important things.
Exactly. And also, I think we should normalize even further where the fear comes from. And so we all have the experience that we were all children, and we were all small, and we were defenseless, basically. And things happened to us when we were defenseless that were painful. And no one wants to experience pain. So our infant and child brain said, ouch, that really hurt. I don't ever want to experience that again. And so whenever it sees, and the brain, as we all know, is really good at instantly assessing a situation, saying, what does this remind me of? And then bringing back, well, let me react to this new situation, which is very much like this other situation, and let me react, if that other situation was negative, let me put up my defenses to make sure I don't feel pain again. So now we are adults. We are no longer defenseless, but our reactions to situations are the reactions that we built up based on the pain we felt as an infant or a child. And it's very difficult to get the brain to no longer react the way it did. But you can understand, like when you were a little kid and you went to school on the first day and you said hello to someone, they didn't say hello back. Ouch, that hurt. So now, you know what? It's just easier to stay with your book or with your computer and just not talk to humans. There's nothing wrong with you. It's very explainable why you have that reaction as an adult. And of course, as an adult, then once you understand where it came from, like, oh, now I get it. Now I can just force myself to have several more interactions with humans and go, not all of them are positive, but some of them will be positive. And now I can start to get over this knee-jerk need to not interact with humans.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just carrying on this example of social interaction, one of the things that was really helpful for me, and I literally just did this 2 months ago, was I think you can hear people talk about this kind of stuff, like, oh, don't be motivated by fear, and translate it into like, I'm never going to be motivated again by fear in like my entire life, right? Like, I'm going to try really hard and not be motivated by fear. And that's just like too hard, right? One of the things that I felt like really helped me was like, I'm going to be 10% less motivated by fear in social interactions or whatever you want to target it towards every week. And it's like, within the bounds of what I might normally do, I'll pick the little bit scarier option. And then if you just do that 10% every week, it's exponential growth, right? Where now I feel like even 2 months ago, I felt pretty awkward talking to people. And now I feel almost no awkwardness talking to people. And for me, that's a huge change because it's this exponential growth. And because, first of all, you have to subscribe to the philosophy, just like, okay, I get it. Like, I really don't want to be motivated by fear at the very least, or I see that as the most important thing. And then an execution strategy that worked for me, at least, was like, let's be 10% less motivated by that every time.
Yes, exactly. And let's also be clear, when you do these things that are scary, they're not going to turn out well all the time.
Hmm.
Sometimes you will crash and burn. You'll have a negative experience. You'll feel pain.
Hmm.
And it's also accepting those results as part of the overall portfolio of results in your life and saying, in the aggregate, was this net positive? And the answer is usually yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring up pain, and I was going to bring that up as the next point. I remember you saying something to me when I came to Kauai like 5 months ago or sometime around then, which was to the effect of, oh, I still feel a lot of sadness and a lot of pain in my life. Everybody does, right? But I've learned to enjoy those times, and I like really like almost feel happy. And at the time I was like, this guy is like fucking crazy. Like, can anybody like, really get to the point where they like enjoy the pain, enjoy like the sadness? And I don't think I'm quite to that level yet, but I've really started to feel that a lot recently too, where the thing that really helped me and kind of the mentality shift that unlocked that for me was really embracing sadness or seeing sadness as a really positive thing for me. And this is obviously subjective, but just my personal view is sadness is really interconnected with love, right? And you really can't experience love without experiencing sadness. Like even if everything goes perfectly in your life, like you find the best possible partner, you like marry them, you have perfect life, whatever, and then like they die or like you die, right? Just like as an obvious example, like even in the best possible case of love and what stereotypically people think of as love, you're going to experience a lot of sadness. And I feel like once I had that deep realization and started to see that more as a positive, I really started to embrace it more. And that was really helpful because I think pain can be different things. Like there's different types of pain. But I think a really positive type of pain, for me at least, is like a sadness type of pain. And really starting to embrace that.
Yes, yes. You're absolutely right. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself, Antonio. That's amazing. And if to experience love, you also have to inevitably experience pain, then the better you are at being with pain, the more love you can have in your life.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the experience of pain, both physical and emotional, is really a physical sensation. And if you're able to look at that physical sensation and get curious about it, like, oh, what's this tingling I'm feeling? And just be curious about it and observe it and not resist it, then you actually don't experience it as pain. Then you just
Mm.
experience it as a physical sensation. And you can test this. You can test it physically first, and then you can test it emotionally. Physically, the easy way to test this is to get into an ice bath. And so if you just walk into an ice bath just like this, your body will go into convulsions because you'll have the sensation, resist it, and you won't be able to breathe. Literally, you'll hyperventilate. And if you sit in that and just force yourself to stay in that ice bath for a minute, after about a minute, your body will start to calm down because it'll realize it's not dying, and then you'll be able to take a calm breath again. Or when you get in, as you're putting your foot in, you don't resist whatever happens. You just get curious and observe and sort of play with it and think of yourself as dancing with this physical sensation. Then you won't experience it as pain. You can get fully in, your body won't convulse, you won't go hyperventilate, and you can take one deep breath literally immediately. And so there's a challenge. I challenge you to go do that, and I challenge you to stay in until you can take one deep breath. And you may only require 2 seconds. And if you are able to do that, then just know that the physical sensation of emotional pain is the exact same as the physical sensation of physical pain. So if you can do it with physical pain, you can also do it with emotional. And you just get curious about the physical sensation when you're feeling sadness or something that you would otherwise have interpreted as emotional pain. You no longer have to interpret it that way. You can now just go, oh, that's an interesting sensation. Let me observe it. And now you're dancing with the emotional, what you previously called pain. And then you massively expand your capacity for experiencing both physical and emotional sensations that you previously interpreted as pain.
Yeah, I completely agree with this. And I think a lot of it comes back to not being motivated by fear still. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
fear has a lot of manifestations. For me, one of the ways I really used to be is very avoidant, which
Mm-hmm.
I didn't initially think of as super related to fear, but I think it really is. And myself, and kind of tying this back to, oh, how can you embrace your emotions, treat them with love rather than trying to push them away? And that ultimately being the way to process them, to feel them more, or potentially dissipate them if they're painful ones, is by not avoiding them. Like, I used to be super good at like putting my emotions in like this tiny little box and like being extremely rational. And as we went through a lot of the coaching, one of the things that was interesting to me is we were undoing a lot of that, and that was kind of scary to me. Uh, because I felt like that was the thing that was really making me a great CEO. And I'm not saying this is what makes every great CEO, but for me at least, I was somebody that could just be hyper rational, could be in this crypto market, always be even keeled, be like, okay, this happened, therefore we should do this, just totally rational. And I was good at that because I just avoided my emotions and put them in this little box. And I think that was kind of level 0 to level 1. Like, I do think being super rational was helpful to me. But now, kind of after coaching with you, going from level 1 to level 2, for me at least, has been like, let's still be rational, but not put things in a box. Let's process them in a really positive way and kind of align with both the thoughts and the emotions around what I want to do, and have both of them be really positive. And basically, what I did is what you're describing in the physical way with the ice bath, translating that into an emotional way where it's just like, okay, you feel something, like feel where that is in your body, really accept it. It's like, let it be, treat it with love. And I think that's been extremely positive for me.
Yes, agreed. But let's
Yeah.
also honor where you were before. Like, just not experiencing the emotion is very effective when making
Mhm.
decisions. And so let's not denigrate that. That's a pretty big level one.
I think it's a pretty big level 1, but I've actually somewhat challenged that. I think going from the level 1 to level 2 has been massive unlock for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just because now I feel really aligned with my emotions. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many CEOs can say this, but I literally like don't feel very much stress at all, like almost none at work. And I still feel a lot of responsibility towards what we're doing. I still want to make these big decisions and care a lot about what we're doing. But I've really processed a lot of those emotions around it. And I've gotten to the place where I'm like, maybe I'll look back on this decision and realize it was wrong, but it was aligned with my thoughts. It was really aligned with my feelings. I'm dealing with things out of love based out of fear. And almost just like knowing that and believing that myself just gives me so much confidence in the decisions that I'm making and kind of how I'm leading. So I do think it's been really important and has gotten me to the point where, like when I came to you, and for those who don't know, I've been talking with Matt for about a year and a half now. And I came into it being very skeptical. Like, I was like very anti like self improvement, self help type stuff. I was open to it. I'm always kind of open and minded, at least I think. But it was very different than the way I thought it was. And I came into it very rationally and did not think like this before, I think, which um, hopefully is a good example of somebody going from a place of hyper rationality to incorporating a lot of the things that you're saying into their life. And it's just made it so much better overall. So it definitely works.
Well, I'm going to give you a compliment here, Antonio. You have dived, whatever the word, the correct,
Mm-hmm.
past conjunction of, or past participation of the word dive is. You dove into this work, especially, again, allowing yourself to feel the feelings and letting them go through you more than probably anyone I've ever seen before. And so, but you put real effort into it and real focus and real concentration, and the results are what they are now. That you being able to make that statement that I'm just okay, stress free with the decisions that get made. If they turn out good, great. If they turn out not to be good, okay too.
Mm-hmm.
You're good with the process.
Yeah.
That's a
I
very
appreciate you
rare
saying
comment to be able to
that.
make.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question, actually, is how did you get to this point, right? Because I kind of had you like sitting there at the end of the tunnel being, here's how you get to this place. I'm here. But I'm curious for you in your own life, like how did you get to the place where you weren't motivated by fear, or at least like what motivated you to start kind of going on that journey for yourself?
Yeah, well, I also don't want to characterize me as having it all together, because I don't.
Totally. Yeah, nobody does. Yeah.
Right on. And I think I may have it more together on the business side. On the personal side, like, a complete mess. And on the business side, the way that I got there was every time I would say something, I had a thought about someone else's situation, and I would say it out loud. Halfway through saying it, I'd be like, wait a second, I'm in the same situation they're in. And these words that I'm sharing for them, they completely apply to me. Oh, shit. Now I got to go do them. So and that's really how each and every time I coach someone, almost always their situation is applicable to me. And I can no longer, and if I'm going to ask them to act, I've got to act too. That's how I got there. And it's so easy to see someone else's life and see where they're just sabotaging themselves. But it's so hard for me to see it my own. And that's why, yeah, but that's why the coaching was just ended up being self-coaching, frankly. And then every once in a while, someone that I coach would be like, hey, Matt, what about you? How can I coach you? I'm like, okay. And they do. And these huge unlocks occur. So that's how it happened.
Yeah. Interesting. I feel like that's been something I've been wanting to do more, as we've talked about, is just kind of extend this to other people I know in my life, and at least lead them on similar paths, and kind of be that coach for other people too.
And accept it when they ask you if they can coach you.
Accepting. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That I'm like super into now. Self-improve all the time, but it's like, how can one become useful to other people around them too? Like, do you think that's kind of just an innate mentality, like being really curious about other people, like really trying to take what they say and apply it to your own life? Like, that's something I would say I still struggle with. Like, honestly, I think I'm somebody that is overconfident, if anything, and sort of like more self-centered, if anything, where I'm sort of like, oh, somebody might be telling me something, but I'm trying to get better at this, but like a little like challenging for me innately to be really curious about it, like think they know better than I do, at least about certain things, or I can learn from them. Like, I think that mentality of like any interaction, like I can learn from this or from this person is kind of unique.
Well, but it's not any interaction. If someone just comes up and says, Matt, this is what you need to do, my instant reaction is no. You can't tell me what to do. You don't know my life. You don't know who I am. You don't know the situation I'm in. So that is very ineffective with me. But when people say, Matt, can I coach you? That's not what they do. What they do is they mimic what I do to them. And what I found that is effective with me and effective with others is to make the person feel like I really do understand their situation first. And that's what I want as well. I want someone to prove to me that they really understand what's going on with me. And that I found this is like the key. And so it is, and it's simply whenever someone says to me what is going on with them, I always, 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 or at least I want to say, okay, let me make sure I really understood. Here's what I'm hearing you say. And then say what I actually heard. And they either go yes or no. And until they say yes, they don't feel like I've heard them. And so I just keep repeating it back until they say, yep, that's it. You got it. And that moment is a huge unlock. Now they're really open to any thought that I have. But frankly, it works even better when I still don't give my thoughts. And I say, there's more. And they go, think for a second. They go, you know what? There is more. Because now what's happened is their brain has a first level thought. But until that thought is confirmed or marked somewhere, their brain just keeps spinning on that one thought. So they can either write it down in a journal, or they can tell it to me and I can repeat it back. Either one means it's now documented somewhere outside of their brain. And their brain can then kind of let it go. And then their brain suddenly can have the next thought. So they share the next thought with me. And then I listen. I say, okay, I think what I heard you say is, and I repeat it back. And they go, yep, that's it. And usually I then say, well, here are my thoughts. But if I'm really good, I say, you know what? There's more. And I just keep saying there's more and keep saying there's more. And we keep going sort of this like spiral downward until we get to some base level thought. And they say, you know what? There's no more. But usually by the time they get to that base level thought, they've had they've figured the whole thing out themselves. And there's really no need for me to share my thought.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting points on like them telling you something, you repeating it back, and then them believing that at least one human in the world understands this part of what they've told you, allows them to let it go, right? And then kind of move on to the next thing. I feel like so many people, everybody probably, just kind of gets stuck in cycles in their minds, right? Where it's like, oh, I can keep thinking about the same thing over and over and over again. And I wonder if that's sort of the reason from a psychological perspective, where it's like, oh, I feel like this is really important. Like, I can't forget this. But I haven't journaled or I haven't like told it to anybody or whatever else. So it's like hard for me to move past that thought. I hadn't really thought of it that way before.
That's right. But I think it's not just telling it to someone. It's confirming that the person actually understood it.
Yeah, they have to, exactly.
That's why a journal is so brilliant, because you can just go reread it and go, yep, that's it. It's written correctly. Yeah.
I think that makes sense. And just like making people feel heard and trusted, I feel like is extremely important as well. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight that you kind of come to, that most of the time, people ultimately know the answer themselves, and kind of them coming to that answer themselves is ultimately going to be so much more impactful than you as a third party, no matter how much they care about you, telling that to them, right? Like if you just have an innate experience of something, you're so much more likely to believe it than if somebody else, even a trusted loved one, tells it to you.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's kind of similar to what we've talked about so far, but why do you think most people are motivated by fear? I mean, we talked a lot about the experiences in the past, like driving pain, and it's like, why is it hard to change that?
Well, I don't think people are, when we say motivated by fear, what that implies is people are moving forward with actions based on fear. So that's one level. And it is true. Like we're fear of missing out, mostly it's fear of failure. Like I don't want to I want to be seen as a success. And that, comes back to childhood, in front of my parents, in front of my teachers, in front of my friends, mostly parents. And it's the fear of not appearing to be successful. And so people work really hard and they spend lots of hours and they try really hard. And so that actually has a positive motivating effect. People put in great effort because of that. Of course, it takes a huge toll on the body. So being motivated by fear at one level is positive. It's getting people to actually put in hours and performance and effort. Problem is it takes a huge toll on the body. It doesn't lead to a good life for them. And my posit is that joy actually motivates people to put in just as much effort and hours, but also leads to a good life for them. So it's much more sustainable. You can sustain that for 40 years, whereas being motivated by fear, eventually the person goes, screw this. Or they become a billionaire and they go, I always, that's a clear marker of monetary success. And then they're still not enjoying their life. And they go, well, I'm quitting. And so joy becomes an important thing to introduce as the long-term, much longer-term motivator. But I think what we were talking about before was not fear as a motivator, but fear as the basis for making decisions or for not making decisions. And that, it has zero positive value, at least that I've seen. Not entirely zero. I mean, yes, in the 2% of cases where there might have been a small negative outcome to this decision, fear will prevent you from having that very low percentage of negative outcomes occur. But the cost is the 98% of positive outcomes that you'll never experience.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think a lot of people think about this like, oh, don't be motivated by fear, sort of like from a burnout perspective.
That's
Like
right.
it's only important as much as like I need it to be to keep being able to work and do the job and things that are important. And I think again that's kind of like the level one understanding. Like,
Hmm.
yes, being able to be the CEO or whatever for 10 years versus burning out in 3 or 4 years, that's a huge difference, right? But I almost
Huge.
think there's a same like level one to level two understanding, which is if you get to the point where you really are minimally motivated by fear or at least influenced by it, you just make so much better decisions overall. And it's kind of what I was talking about before. Like you literally are way more productive. Like I seriously feel like at this point I'm basically retired. And I'm just like doing this because I really want to, right? Like I could do pretty much anything. And that gets me to the point where I'm not making any of these decisions out of fear, right? Because like I don't have to do this, I don't have to do anything, but I'm doing this because I want to, and that just allows me to think way bigger, to make much bigger decisions. And then I think it's also like we talked some about like how can you best motivate other people in your life as much as you care about them and you feel like you've gotten to a pretty good place yourself. I honestly think the best way to do it is focus on yourself even more, not exclusively. Like you have to focus on other people too, but if you can just kind of be that example to people and really as the CEO, as the parent, as the grandparent, like whatever in your life, get to that place where people can really tell what you're motivated by and can see like, wow, like Antonio is serious, like Matt is serious, like he actually is not motivated by fear in a lot of these things. And both of them sitting here saying that this has been extremely positive in their lives. Like, I think that can be the best possible motivator of others if you're just able to really embody that yourself as well. So that's kind of one of the explanations I've kind of come up with as to why even once you get to a point where you're like, oh, I could like do this job like forever, for a long time
Hmm.
at least. Like I don't feel
Hmm.
burnt out. I'm like happy to work 10 hours a day or whatever.
Right.
Like I think even just continuing to go on the path farther and farther is useful from that example perspective too.
I completely agree. And I also think that if anybody has the option of doing this, running an experiment that lasts a month, 2 months, 3 months, where I would recommend not taking compensation for what you do,
Mm-hmm.
and then seeing what it is that you do. Because when you're not taking compensation, there's only one rational choice, and that is to do what you enjoy. And as soon as you're not enjoying it, you stop doing it. And once you've been doing it for a while, maybe like the longer you can do that, the more ingrained and the more you will know what activities you really love, then you can go back to taking compensation for them because you
Mm-hmm.
won't be distracted. But if you haven't ever run that experiment, there's a pretty good chance that you're doing something because part of your brain is thinking, "Oh, I can make more money doing that." But if that avenue isn't available, then there can only be one rational variable, and that's enjoyment. And then if
Mm-hmm.
you find yourself doing this thing and now I'm loving it and loving it more and more and more, now you've discovered your joy.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the other things that happened to me that we've talked about as we've done coaching is that my overall life got a lot better. And
Uh-huh.
initially, I thought coaching was mostly just going to be work, but it just really quickly translated and spread throughout my entire life. And that really got me thinking about the overlap between work and life, especially as somebody that's in a privileged position to have a lot of control over both parts as the founder of the company. Really, it's like my company. I can do whatever I want. It's like it's my life. Like I can be friends with or do whatever I want in that part of my life too. I'm curious, how do you think about like the overlap of work and life? Like, are there a lot of lessons that translate between the two? Like some, like all lessons? Like, should people, or do you, or how do you, have you seen people like keep them separate or like integrate them sort of together? And I'm just kind of curious, have you had a similar thing happen to you where potentially you like make some progress in work and learn some things and that translates to life, or vice versa, where you learn some things in life and that translates to work? How have you seen that work out for both yourself and other people?
Well, I'll talk about others first, then I'll talk about myself second. In others, what I found, at least those that I work with, if someone we do something called magic questions, and we try to do it once a month with everybody in the company. And we basically ask people to rate how are they feeling about their work life? How are they feeling about their personal life? How are they feeling about how the company's performing? How are they feel about working with their team? How the members of their team? How do they feel about working with their manager? And we ask them to rate it 1 to 5, 3 being meeting expectation, 5 being, oh my God, it couldn't be any better, 1 being it couldn't be any worse. And whichever is the lowest category, we say, well, what would get it to the next level? And then they would say, write it out. And then we ask them to actually do that thing that would get it to the next level. And we hold them accountable to it. And we include personal life, which most companies wouldn't do, but we do. And the reason we do is because we think that it's massively important to have a good overall life, and that if someone is feeling joy, the brain works best when the person is feeling joy throughout their life. But also, it shows each person in our organization that we care about them as a human being. Like, we care about their personal life, and we're actually going to help them improve their personal life. And we have found massive gains by doing this. 1, people just perform better overall, but 2, people feel really cared for, and because they haven't experienced that in any other place they've ever worked. So that's one thing. So yes, I've found that it's important to care about the whole person. And then in my own life, have I seen parallels and drawn lessons back and forth? Absolutely. Maybe to a fault. Maybe to the point where I've learned things about how organizations work and think, oh, I can just apply that to my family. And then my family goes, Matt, what the heck are you doing? Stop using that, company running technique on us. We see right through it. And it doesn't work at all. So I would say there are definitely limits to a
the
family.
Way I think about it,
right?
It's like the principles often translate. Like,
yes.
For example, and let's just talk about like relationship, like romantic or whatever, or even friend relationship to work. Like, I think a lot of the principles are similar, and the things you learn in management are that, oh, we have to be really good at giving feedback, and we have to set clear values and, clear goals, and we got to be going to the same place. How are we going to accomplish that in work? Oh, we'll have like one-on-ones and all this written feedback, OKRs, all this stuff. So obviously you can't maybe it's for some people, but for most people, you can't really set OKRs for your girlfriend, right? But you can definitely, like, the principles are the same, right? Like, good communication has to exist in a great relationship, like good goals, or at least I believe both people have to be moving in the same direction to make a really excellent relationship. Got to be aligned from a values perspective. So I've kind of thought about it through that framework, not applying the literal practices one-to-one in each place, but trying to go one level deeper and understand what's the core principle that I learned either in life or work. And then think for first principles, how can I apply that to this given relationship or family situation or whatever else? And I feel like that's been pretty positive for me.
Great. I love it. And the great thing about personal relationships is you get to practice many times. You have many interactions per day, whereas in work, you often just like one interaction per month. So it's good to practice whatever the principle is in your personal life to see you can actually create a great relationship in your personal life. And if you can that's the harder one. Then you can likely do it at work.
Makes sense. Yeah, kind of going back towards the overall life stuff in general, I'm curious, both for yourself and what you've seen or perceive in other people, what do you think the core heuristic you have and other people may have for determining the quality of their life is? Because I feel like it can vary a lot person to person. For some people, it's kind of success. For some people, it's happiness. I've kind of come to term my core heuristic for the quality of my life as contentment, even over happiness, I would personally say. Because I think they're slightly different. Like, you could have impact, connection, like something else. What would you say is kind of the core like heuristic for yourself that you really drive towards?
So rather than say what the metric is, because I don't think there is one for me, I think it's perception. So there was a time maybe 6 years ago where I was part of a men's group. We would meet together once every 2 months, and we'd have to at the beginning of the meeting, you'd have to share with everyone on a scale of 1 to 10 how your life was. And I kept sharing 7. And then I would describe what was going on in my life, and what was going on in my life, like this amazing thing happening, that amazing thing happening, the other amazing thing happening. And I would rate my life a 7. And I just kept doing this over and over and over again. And finally, the group en masse revolted against me. And they said, Matt, this is bullshit. How can you rate your life a 7 when all these amazing things keep happening to you in your work, in your family, in your individual life? And it was a wake-up call for me to realize that I wasn't appreciating what was happening in my life. And so the first thing I did was they basically gave me forced homework, and they say, okay, now you're going to have to keep a gratitude journal, and every morning you have to write down 3 things that you're grateful for in your life. And so I started doing that. And what had happened also was the entire group came back with, in unison at me. And I'd seen the group do this to other people before. And whenever they had done it, the person who was sort of in the hot seat would resist and they go, no, that's not true. I don't need to do this. But I'd seen the group being right each and every time the group was in unison. So when the group was in unison, and telling me something, I knew they were probably right. So I accepted. That was the first thing I did. The second and it worked. Now I felt like after that 30 days, my life was an 8. And then the second thing was I read a book called The Big Leap by an author named Gay Hendricks. And it has a motto that it recommends that you say to yourself every day. And so I just printed it up and put it on the shower and just read it out loud every day. And that started to have a positive effect. And there were other sort of little things that I did that kept going, that kept allowing me to both appreciate and have enough capacity to hold all of this goodness. The principle in The Big Leap is that we get used to feeling a certain way about our life and thinking that's what we're comfortable with and that's what we deserve. And so when things start to go better, objectively better in our lives, there's part of our brain that says, whoa, I'm not comfortable here. There's like a different temperature setting. I'm used to 72 degrees. This is now 80 degrees. I'm not comfortable at 80 degrees. And psychologically, to get to a more familiar place, the brain will sometimes sabotage us, introduce things that will objectively bring our lives back down to what we're more familiar with. So that requires this conscious effort to counteract that or be aware of that tendency and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to breathe and hold enough space to accept all of this goodness in my life and just sit with it and be good with it. So that actually was also very effective. And between those two things, my life eventually became a 10, and it's been a 10. I felt like mostly been a 10 ever since. There have been some major hiccups along the way. But in general, in the past 6 years, it's been that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that for what it's worth. But I think like having that somewhat more quantitative mindset where you're like, oh, my life is a 7 versus my life is a 8, 9, 10, or whatever you feel like it is, and having some way to tell whether you value like success or connection or happiness, I feel like is useful too. I totally agree the way to get there is by like changing your perception of what happens, and then that will also naturally cause better things to happen over time. But I still think it's kind of useful to have some of those markers in your head for really like, what are you looking for? And those can change over time. But like, if you just don't really have any view of where your life is right now, it's hard to motivate yourself to go forwards or know if you're making progress.
That's true.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the things I'm curious about is I'm curious if you would define yourself as a very empathetic person or not. Like, do you think it's easy for you to figure out how people are feeling and thinking and kind of put yourself in their shoes? Or is that something you've more learned over time?
I don't think I'm an empathetic person. I think I try to understand people's feelings, and I maybe have gotten to a kindergarten level at it. But there are so many people that I experience who are, postgraduate in this category that I realize that I'm just not even close. And there are people in my life who want me to have postgraduate level empathy and to just understand their emotions and understand the impact that I have on people and the emotions that I create. And if there's one category that I just haven't been able to create yet, that's it. And so a lot of my methods and systems are efforts to create a process out of discovering other people's emotional state, because I am unable to intuit it. And I know I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why I asked you, because that had always been my suspicion, is that you're not actually like that empathetic of a person. And then my suspicion was also basically what you said. Your response to that, which I really respect, and that actually really resonated with me too, because I don't think I'm a zero at empathy in the grand scheme of comparing yourself to others, probably lower on the empathy scale too. But I really respected how you've been able to take that low level of starting empathy, call it or whatever, and come up with frameworks, like practices to be able to still form deep connection, right? Because I think like being a more empathetic person innately makes it easier to connect with people, because you can feel how they're feeling, people can feel that you feel how they're feeling, right? And that just naturally like connects you more with other people. And I think for myself in my own life, and I think both of us would say that we really deeply value connecting with others. But I had always found it hard to square, like not being a very empathetic person with like, how do I connect deeply with people? And I think the answer is basically what you've done, and you've really codified that better than anybody that I know has. And I think for me too, it's just like learning the ways that you are supposed to like connect with people, whether it's like making them feel heard, like putting yourself in their shoes, like repeating back to them what they've said to you, like giving them the space to like think for themselves. There's a lot of things that you can do around this. But I think that that's actually been something we haven't really talked about this, but that was like somewhat inspiring to me too. It's just like, how can you come up with a framework for figuring out what's important, even in places where you're maybe not as innately good.
Mm-hmm. That's actually where you need frameworks.
Totally. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
For the stuff you're good at, no framework needed.
Exactly. So that's very interesting. One of the things I'm curious is, what do you most value in other people? And what do you kind of most value in yourself? If that's like something innate about somebody else, or that's something that they've kind of learned to do.
Well, the thing that I enjoy doing most is laughing. So I just find I just get such instant dopamine release when I laugh. And so I really value being around people that I can laugh with. And it turns out my bar for laughter is incredibly low. So it doesn't have to be anything super intellectual at all. And that's it. Just people who, like me, just appreciate laughter in its own right. No need for anything more significant or deeper meaning than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. We touched on this a little bit before, but I'm curious, how do you think, or what do you think are the best qualities or the most important things in a leader versus the most important things in a coach? Like, how do you see a lot of people being able to do both very well? Do you think they're pretty distinct? Do you think they're learnable things or more innate? Or how do you think about the difference between those two, and who can be really strong at them?
Yeah. Well, a coach is, I think, coach and manager to me is the same thing. And maybe that means I'm not a coach. Maybe that means I'm a manager. But when I think about what I do with you, Antonio, and with other people, other CEOs that I work with, what I'm trying to do is show, hey, I'm now your manager. Like 1,000 people report to you, or 100, or however many people, but you don't report to anyone. Now you report to me. And if after 3 meetings you feel more empowered, more engaged, more everything, then you know that my one-on-one management methodology works. And you can just, it's all written down in a Google Doc. You can just copy and paste it with your reports. That's how I think of myself. Maybe that makes me not a coach. Maybe that makes me a manager. But then a leader, in my opinion, is a manager is, I've got, 8 people directly that I'm working with, and then we've got a team, and making sure that each person, feels heard, so that they're motivated. They feel like that someone is on their side unblocking them, but also someone is holding them accountable to the most important things that they said they were going to do, which also shouldn't feel like micromanaging, should feel like, oh, you're helping me achieve my goals by reminding me of these actions that I said I wanted to do and helping me figure out why I'm not getting them done. Because there's always some structural block. Like the most common thing that people say, oh, I didn't do that action even though I said it was the most important thing for me to do, is because I forgot. Okay, well, great. That means you don't have a to-do list. Let's create a to-do list for you. And we do. And then suddenly, boom, huge unlock. Or I ran out of time. Great. Let's take your most important actions and put them on your calendar to make sure they get done. Boom, huge unlock when that happens. And then once those two actions occur, most people that I work with do 100% of their actions going forward. It's only in the first 1 or 2 meetings that they miss an action. So that's also helping them perform better. It's not trying to point out where they're wrong. It's trying to help them succeed. A leader, by contrast, is hopefully all those things, but also can take a larger group that they're not working directly with and inspire the larger group and motivate the larger group. And usually the way I've seen that done is just by being a good storyteller and saying, here, as a group, this is what we're trying to do. We have this person who has this problem, and we're trying to help them solve that problem. And if it's stated in that, if you're able to create empathy for the person, when I mean the customer, then you're able to motivate the entire organization to want to help that individual, even if that individual is like, VP of marketing at a Fortune 500 company. That's okay. Still a human who's got a problem, and your MarTech product is going to help that human.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so I think we're kind of winding down now. I have one more question. At the end of all of our sessions, you always make me give you feedback, so I'm going to do the same to you.
Okay, great.
So in just kind of more general terms, we've obviously talked a lot in the past year or so, and hopefully you've witnessed me change a good bit. Where do you think I still have the farthest to go, either in terms of like something I don't realize yet, something I'm thinking about yet, or something I believe? And it doesn't have to be like a total solution, or it could just even be kind of like a general topic or area. Curious what you think of there.
Well, usually the way I like to give feedback is a rating 1 to 5, then what you're doing that I like and what would get you to the next level. And if I give you a 5, that means I have no advice to give. My initial reaction is 5, but I'm not going to give you a 5 just to leave the door open for some kind of constructive feedback. So I'm going to give you 4.5. What I like about what you're doing is what we've talked about. You have taken this study of eliminating acting on fear. Not that you don't ever feel it, but eliminating acting on it maybe further than anyone I've ever coached. So that's amazing. And so again, in our coaching sessions now, I'm just sort of nodding my head. We say, here's the situation. Here's what I did to create it. Here's my proposed solution. I just go, yeah, makes total sense, because I see you've eliminated the fear-based thinking 99.9%. Where could you go to the next level? I mean, you've already stated it. You say now you want to be able to do what I'm doing with people, which is I'm showing them and guiding them to this place. And I think that's a perfect place for you to go, because you're now an authority. And you've already done it yourself. So you know all the steps needed to get there. So you can easily share it with others.
Yeah, makes sense. I still think there's a lot of work to do to be able to like translate what you yourself have done into how can I either inspire or communicate to others how to do this thing.
Fair enough.
So I think there's still a lot to do. And we're talking some about that, obviously, but I appreciate that.
Well, I'll tell you where it really got to the next level for me. Not when I tried to coach others, but when I tried to teach someone to coach others. When I did a coach training, I had to really think, what is it that I am doing that's actually working? And I had to document that and share that. And when I did, went, oh my God, why am I not doing more of that actual core thing? And it actually changed my coaching far for the better because I started concentrating way more on that. It turns out it was the making people feel heard thing. That was like the core.
Interesting.
So if you not only coach people, but teach someone to coach, you'll crush it.
Hopefully I'll get there soon. Yeah, I'll definitely think a lot more about that. Well, Matt, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate you as always. And yeah, it's a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Antonio.
All right. Thanks.
Right on.